Hey everyone, welcome to Social 10 Online Digital Classroom. My name is Mr. Hunter. For those of you that have never had me before, I taught Social 10-1 honors this semester, but now what we've done is we've taken all of the Social 10s across all of the different sections from all of the different teachers and put them together in one online digital classroom. So first of all, I want to say welcome to everybody. Each week, teachers are going to be posting content for you and some lessons and some assessment for you to stay up to date and continue your Social 10 course as normal. Now, what's tricky about that is when we had our last day of classes, a lot of Social 10 classes were kind of all over the place in terms of a curriculum. So for some of you, we're going to be starting on new stuff. Some of you, we're going to be starting on stuff that you might have done earlier this semester, but we're going to be trying to start all in one place so that we can all kind of get through the course and finish our coursework together. So firstly, I want to say, of course, welcome, welcome, welcome. But I also want to introduce and show you how the Social 10 virtual help desk is going to work. So every day, Monday to Friday, you're going to have a teacher that is going to log on at a designated time onto Google Meetup. So that it's a great opportunity for you guys to get some clarification or maybe just need things explained a little bit more in detail, or if you have any questions, that will be the place so that we can have at least a little bit of interaction between teacher and all of the students. So I myself am going to be doing the first week, and some of my other colleagues will be jumping on in the following weeks because we've all got different classes. All of us are going to be team teaching Social 10. So there's going to be a little variance, but from every Monday to Friday, 1:15 to 1:45, feel free to log on for some just some questions and some discussion regarding some of the course material. Okay, so I want to first show you how Google Meets works, just for those of you at home that haven't ever used it. So note this LTSS 10 code. You'll need that because when we go to Google Meets, it'll ask you for a meeting code. Okay, so in order to get there, now of course you can just Google search it, and Google Meets is what it's called. But if you're at home on a Chromebook or on your Google account, if you click on in the top right hand corner where it says Google Apps, you can click on that and click on Google Meet. Once you're there, it'll take you to a screen that looks like this, and it'll say join or start a meeting. And that is exactly what you want to do. It'll ask you for the name. Now, of course, for this course, it's LTSS 10 because it's all of the social studies 10s, and you're going to be going there. So when you hit continue, it's going to take you to the meetup, and make sure your camera is, if you don't want people to see you, you can click your camera off, or you can turn off your microphone. So when you do join, everyone's not all constantly talking like that. So when you guys go to log on at 1:15 Monday to Friday, you will see, of course, the teacher and anything that they're wanting to present. So super cool, super good way for you guys to ask us questions and have a little bit more of an interaction regarding the course material. All right, so starting off with the age of imperialism. So this week, we're going to be looking at essentially what is imperialism, how did it work, what era of time are we talking about, and then we're going to finish off this week with a case study on India. Now, if you're from my Social 10-1 honors class, you would have already covered this, but I want to say welcome to the other classes who maybe have not quite got this far yet, and we're basically going to be starting over at the beginning. So what is imperialism? The age of imperialism was an awesome time where you had the European powers all across the world gathering resources and exploring new territories and trying to carve out their own empires. Okay, in terms of this slide here, these are all of the specific learning outcomes that grade 10s in social studies are to learn all across Alberta. And I just want to point out of some of the ones that we're going to be focusing on, and that would be 2.7. Oops. 2.7, looking at the rise of capitalism, industrialization, imperialism, Eurocentrism, and looking at how 2.8, which is the relationship between historical globalization and imperialism, all factored into how the world has been shaped. So those are the ones that we're going to be focusing on. Okay, let's have a look at our week at a glance. So we have imperialism and imperialism in India as our main case study for this week. So Monday, we're going to be going over the notes, which is what we're doing right now. And Tuesday, we're going to look at a couple imperialism videos and have some discussion points. And on Wednesday, we're going to be looking at, there's a really cool kind of set of notes that I have regarding India and Mr. Mahatma Gandhi and his influence in British imperialism. Thursday, there's going to be a bit of a reading and a handout to go home and some discussion points that I want you to consider. And then to top it all off at the end of the week, we're going to be looking at a bit of a quiz online, totally at home. You can only a couple of multiple choice questions and maybe some short answer. We're kind of building it so that it can be done at home, completely on your own, at your own time, at your own speed, so that you can at least get a little bit of feedback as to how you're understanding the course. Okay, so to start the age of imperialism, it's very, very closely tied to the Industrial Revolution. Now, the Industrial Revolution, of course, was a global phenomenon that started all across Europe, and how European powers became more and more reliant on the factory based system, which, of course, led to having all of these factories spring up out of the ground, and how each of these factories now had goods that they needed to produce. Now, human demographics changed in the sense that more and more people were living in the cities, which then led to more and more people needing massively produced goods. Increased production, of course, you need more and more raw materials. And more raw materials means more factories, which means more goods. Okay, so I included these these little clip arts down here at the bottom because it shows kind of the natural progression. So let's take a good like timber, for example, that was harvested all across North America. It was then put on a boat and sent back to Europe for them to manufacture it through a factory based system, or basically like an assembly line. And then, of course, it would produce these massively produced goods. So, for example, I used a wooden chair. So, in short, the wood or the timber would get put on a boat, shipped back to Europe. Europe would then ship it to a factory. The factories would assemble it in an assembly line type fashion, with each member in the assembly line focusing on only one job. So one nail, one screw, one piece of the chair that they would be assembling. And eventually you were able to mass produce chairs. So you would be able to produce a lot more chairs than the traditional carpenter craftsman type labor that was done in the past. Okay, so you can see how more and more goods were produced and more people needed goods who are living in the city. Therefore, the main genesis was that they needed more and more raw materials. And of course, in order to get more and more raw materials, you would have to explore and gain more territory, which again is kind of one of the main motives for imperialization, is having the ability to go and create more and more opportunities to gain more raw materials. More raw materials led to more production. More production of goods led to, of course, more manufactured goods for everyone. See, so it's a whole big flow chart of how each of these things became made into products. So let's start off with a definition for imperialism. So the definition is an association that intentionally benefits one people over another, a policy of extending a country's power and influence. Okay, so all throughout time, especially European history, you have nations in Europe that are deliberately putting their power over top of other places around the world in order to gain these benefits. So, as I explained with the Industrial Revolution, you needed more and more raw materials, and the only way to get them was, of course, to take over more and more places around the world. Okay, so during this time period, the Age of Imperialism is a specific time period where you saw a lot of exploration, a lot of exploring distant lands, all trying to figure out what kind of resources are around the world and how do we ship them back. So, a lot of powerful European nations claim territories all over the world. The British, for example, which is kind of our main case study too, which is kind of our main case study too, because we have a lot of ties to the British monarchy. You had places like North America, Australia, India, places in Africa. Literally all across the world had some claim to a European power during this time. And the places that didn't were not quite yet explored. So entrepreneurs, which is a cool, not only a cool word to say, but it's kind of a cool idea. These merchants would explore all over the world. Guys like Christopher Columbus or Samuel du Champlain, they would explore to try to find any type of valuables that they could send back. Oops. They would find any kind of valuables that they could ship back. And what they would do is they would talk with a lot of local indigenous populations and try and gain control over some of the resources that were there. Now, it wasn't just natural resources that were around, especially in places like North America, but it also had the ability for them to conquer different types of people. Triangular trade. So this is a cool term that I talked about with my 10-1 honors in the past, where it is kind of shaped like a big triangle. So of course you would have mainly your European powers, places like England and the British, for example, were very good in terms of their organization and their structure as to how they wanted how things to conduct themselves. So what the Europeans would do is find these different colonies all across the world, and they would basically create a economic factor to them. And what I mean by that is they would find different ways to take the resources from the colonies and ship them back, manufacture them into goods, and then sell them right back. Okay, so we're going to start here on the right with the map. So in Europe, especially the British is the example in this map, what they would do is they would go across the world and conquer all of these different colonies. Now, each of these colonies had different things that they could offer the mother country in return. So North America, for example, they would grow lots of different crops like rice and silk and indigo, tobacco, sugar, molasses, wood. All of these different places in North America could produce these raw natural resources. Then, as you can see from the green arrow, they get shipped back into Europe. Once they arrive back in Europe, of course, they're manufactured into different goods, and then those goods are then sold back to the colonies. So as you can see, for example, manufactured goods and luxuries, guns, cloth, iron, and beer all get sent to the different colonies. And since the colonies weren't producing it themselves, there was a market for when they were being sold back to them. If we look at some of the resources from Africa, one of the major unfortunate parts of history is the amount of slavery that was people that were captured and sold into slavery in Africa were then sent into North America on some of the plantations for them to work. And so, as you can see, it's kind of this big triangle of all of these different goods and services that are being traded across. Okay, now let's look at this kind of circular looking diagram. So as you can see, the mother country is the European power. They're manufacturing goods and selling them to the colonies because there wasn't really a strong industry in the colonies. However, the colonies would then sell all of their resources back to the mother country. So as you can see, it's this vicious cycle where it just keeps going and going and going. You're buying, you're selling, you're buying, you're selling. This diagram here on the left is you're looking at the balance of trade. So by having more exports is going to weigh you down than opposed to having fewer exports, which made it favorable. So you would want all of these different things trading and trading and trading, because then you get more opportunities to and have more access to other things that your country doesn't. And the whole time, the mother country is selling to the colonies and the colonies are having their resources extracted. This allows the mother country to gain an incredible amount of wealth. And this was super important because the more colonies that you could have, the more wealth that you would gain. So this was a really great way for European powers to get rich, is by taking those resources, manufacturing it into goods, and then selling those goods right back to the colony, which not only is super cool in a way in terms of economics, but it's also a great way for people to get rich. Okay, so this last slide, sorry it's a little blurry on my computer, but this slide, everything in red during the age of imperialism was controlled by England, or the British Empire as they were known at the time. And what's cool about this is there's an old saying called "the sun never sets on the British Empire." And this is so true because if we look at where the British Empire was located, everything in red is British territory during this time period. And so, as you can see, places like Canada, places in South America, large parts of Africa, India, Australia, New Zealand, these are all major countries that, of course, were put under the British rule, which is kind of cool because the saying the sun never sets on the British Empire is that as the sun goes across from one side of the earth to the other, it's always shining down on British subjects, which is definitely was a point of pride for the British people to see that, okay, look how powerful our country is, look how well they're doing, and look at all of these different economies that we now have depending on us for manufactured goods. The British, of course, too, were also extremely skilled sailors and navigators, which allowed them to explore and explore and explore and set up these massive trading networks all using ships. Because, of course, England as an island is rather small, but the amount of influence and power that they were able to have all across the world is pretty remarkable. Okay, let's recap. So the main message, of course, from this presentation is you need to understand what imperialism is. You also need to understand what was some of the motives that the European powers were gaining all of these territories and colonies across the world. And that, of course, is kind of the main part. Understanding and now using this knowledge to apply it to different case studies, different situations is, of course, the next step. So later this week, we're going to be looking at British rule in India, and we're going to look at Gandhi trying to stand up to the British Empire and seeing some of his influences around the world, as well as next week we're going to be looking into places in Africa and places in Canada and looking at the different examples of imperialism helped shape this idea of what we have is historical globalization. So again, I just want to recommend you guys, if you have any questions or if you have any kind of comments or want to talk a little bit about what I've covered today, check in on Monday to Friday this week from 1:15 to 1:45 on Google Meets. I will be there. I'll be there answering some questions. And I'm looking forward to reaching out and talking to you guys. I know this first day is a little troubleshooting. We're trying to work out a lot of the kinks here. But I think at the end of the day, this is brand new for all of us. And we're trying to figure out what's the best way to get you guys some information, some content out, as well as looking at what this new school type atmosphere is going to be like with COVID-19 basically shutting everything down. We wanted to make sure that you guys were not forgotten about, and we wanted to make sure that you guys are keeping up and following along at home. All right, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in and looking forward to seeing some of you this afternoon.